Hey folks, before we dive in, just wanted to let you know this is episode 2 of a two-part series that we shot. If you haven't caught the first episode, you may want to go back, jump in, and listen to it. If not, enjoy. A follow on to that, you brought up decisions, and I want to dive into that one. When you start talking about decisions, can you just like define that a little bit more and give some specific examples? Is it like where is that like a this person can approve this much money type thing? Is it a this person directs the work type of thing? Just kind of define a little bit more of what decisions mean.
So that's certainly a part of it, to have a governance framework about who can make decisions at what level so that you are fulfilling potentially your compliance requirement. But one of the things that I've sort of also come to see with experience is decision making is that very critical part of your overall period of performance that does not get captured in your critical path schedule, but is actually one of the most important factors because and I think you guys will all have seen this. There's a certain part of the work that's very well defined and everybody executes it. And then you get to a point, and now you've got a bit of a problem. While all of that is being sorted out, while a decision is being made in terms of what to do next, you are basically waiting. And all of your planning and your dependencies are basically stopped while that decision is being made, right? So the ability to make decisions well is going to be a combination of your monitoring and control capabilities. So you actually know what's going on. It's going to be about your comms, that if you've identified an issue, can you get that issue to that person who has the authority to actually make a decision on it? And then ensuring that that decision is being made and then being cascaded back into the organization so that people can actually start responding to that. And so it's one of those things. You need to have good decision making. How you will achieve the good decision making will be a combination of your comms, of your monitoring control, um, and the way that your organization is structured in terms of distribution of decision making authority. Uh, I think we would all know this scenario where we can't move forward. The client has to make a call, and now effectively everybody's waiting for that decision to be made, and everything just comes to a halt while that's happening, right? Optimizing decision making has to be one of those really important factors that has to be taken into consideration, um, which again you would not be able to properly place into a schedule. Like how do you estimate the time is going to take to make a decision, right? You can guess, but it could be a lot longer, it could be a lot less. So you want to optimize that.
But I think there's also the issue with decision is what decision are you trying to make? Is it what's the purpose of that decision? So a lot of decisions are made because it's part of the audit trail. So we want to award a contract for 10 billion for putting whatever in, and you're going, I've got to go to a board and get approval because but it's part of the requirements, and the most efficient way of doing it is this procurement method. But I want sign off on this because it's outside of my deal. But to mapping, so what I've tended to do before is to map a decision timeline. To meet the schedule, we'll need decisions at these points in time. And these are fundamental decisions that pivot the job one way or another. But what we're not very good at is giving the right socialization of these decisions before time. So it shouldn't be a surprise, but usually it is, unfortunately. But also what the consequence of that decision is. We never test, was that the right decision? And I think we're learning that a lot going through these major programs and lessons learned is you can actually spot the time when it started to decline in performance or trajectory. There was not a true understanding of the consequence of this sequence of decisions or a particular decision.
So I've got two things on that. Number one is something's just come into my mind, which is what a venture capitalist told me a couple of years ago, which was actually that in building an entrepreneurial business, you should actually have a decisions log where you write down what decisions you made and just super high level why you made that decision and what information you had at the time, such that you can almost trace it back and in part actually look at your own development and look at the growth. But it's just made me think that I've never actually ever seen a decisions log on a project. It's otherwise known as the contract, but that's the output, not the actual articulation of the decision. So it's like, we're going to buy these bolts. Well, why are we buying these? That's not articulated. So it's just a.
Yeah, you're dead right. And we do tend to keep decisions logs in various forms. So design will have a decision log. Why did the design change? So that will have one. The change register is another form of a decisions log. And the dependency map interface matrix. So they're maybe not in one log, but you can pull them together to give you that timeline. But I think you're right. I mean, it's a good tool to have.
I was going to say also minutes of meetings in terms of those key interactions that you're having, and it's important to know what are those interactions, and they might be between important stakeholders. So when the delivery team is meeting with the client, you definitely want that meeting to be minuted, right? Because in the course of that conversation, smaller decisions will be made. So you want to keep a record of that. Then the other way to handle it is that you only allow key decisions to be made at particular venues. So like at a board meeting, for example. So there are ways to make sure the day-to-day stuff that's being discussed, you have a mechanism to sort of capture it as it comes, but then also say, hang on, we're not going to make a decision on that particular topic here because we have to take it to this particular venue or authority to do that and then to document it effectively, right? So there's ways to ensure that you are in fact capturing key decisions as they're happening.
When regime change, which will just veto every decision you've just made. So you can, and on a mega giga project, that does happen.
Yeah. Well, this kind of brings me to a point of thinking. I'm pretty sure at this point, listeners will be listening to this. They'll be glued to their headphones or whatever they're listening. But I know a lot of my friends who will listen to this will be thinking, I've actually never been exposed to this kind of thinking yet in my career because I'm not quite there. And I think a lot of people will appreciate not that the rareness of this thinking, but the rareness of the clear articulation of this thinking. Being able to articulate it in proper frameworks is a very rare thing. How often do you see parity in other companies like general contractors or consultants of this level of thinking and the articulation of this level of thinking? Or is it actually a very rare thing?
I'd like to say it is rare. I think there's enough people to think about it. Whether they act on it is another thing. I think that's the thing. You've got the diverse and the competing objectives, which, is probably a completely different conversation around. The contractor's job is to maximize the profit or the margins within materials and resources. We're trying to deliver benefits earlier and overachieve on benefits. So you've always got this dichotomy, and the consultant is just trying to put bums on seats. This dichotomy of thinking is always at odds. But really, you would employ everyone as an employee, even the contractors, and you've all got shared percentage ownership of the end goal. But we're not in that kind of a world. So you've got to somehow align those objectives to give you the answer that you want. And you're never going to get a harmonic kind of view through a program. But I would always say that the role of the program management and of team is to look for the flat notes in the orchestra, and how do you spot them through the KPIs, through the metrics, through the bad performance, that kind of thing. So articulating and talking about this in this kind of manner is probably something that Athar do quite regularly, because it's a frustrating business to be in, because you do have these opposing objectives. And even personalities, contract ending, contract starting, new people joining, attrition rates, all these other things create a very fluid mixture, a recipe, as Athar measures. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it very well, but it's not something that is taught. Is learning this through 1,000 cuts.
Yep, and I will echo that and also add the question you asked, Greg. It's a bit of a yes and no, because the overall team that's delivering the program is composed of many players. So you have the contractors, you have the designers, you have the architect. To some extent, you will find that those individual groups are acting as you would expect and might individually be quite optimized at doing what they do, right? However, if you are approaching the problem at a program level, you still have to figure out how to get the value from those various groups or teams that are part of your overall orchestra, if you will, right? So you're acting like a conductor, and you've got to make sure you're extracting the best value out of all of your various members of your overall project delivery team, right? What I'm finding is And it goes back to the complexity in the industry as the industry tries to do more complex and larger jobs. The effort of making sure that you're getting all of the elements to work effectively together gets more complicated. And so that's where I would say there is a bit of a rarity because the number of genuinely mega and giga jobs are fewer. So there's a lot of learning here to be had and innovation to occur where we figure out how can we get more done with more players but still be very, very effective. And I would also argue, which we haven't really touched upon, but there's a technology aspect to this as well of how do we leverage the newest technology in terms of information systems and using it to get people to work in a more cohesive way. There's a lot to be done over there as well. So the short answer is I think it is rare because these opportunities where you really hit those high levels of complexity are not as numerous. But I think you're going to see more and more of that. And I think we're going to see more articulation of the best processes to get larger teams to work effectively together.
I think that's a fascinating point, and I could take this in one of two directions. One direction is going down the people process systems. By the way, you've taught me something because I've always thought about it as people process systems, and I haven't ever articulated that it's the integration of everything. But
Yes.
It's absolutely true because when interconnections spike, complexity goes exponential and goes nuts. So I'm going to remember that. And actually, it's you mentioned something before, which was essentially bringing systems that essentially automate things as opposed to teaching people forms. I call that systematization, which goes creation, processization, and then systematization. So that's one. But the angle that I want to go down is actually something I'm seeing in the data center landscape right now. And what I'm seeing, my career's not long yet. I've been in this well over a decade, but I haven't done 40 years. And one of the things I'm starting to see, I'm not saying anything, Paul. No. One of the things I'm seeing is that clients that haven't bought very large projects before buy very large projects like they would very small projects. In that I am seeing data center builders buying a design and then buying materials and then buying a builder and then separately buying an integrator, as opposed to going, actually, this is going to be an enormous, complex, interconnected beast because of the permits, because of the volume of manpower we're getting on this, because of the time sensitivities around commissioning and handover. And I just wonder if you might not be able to, but is that trend that I'm seeing actually true? Do you see industries that are less evolved doing less integrated things until they get burnt?
The client isn't one person. These are organizations that are established with many different levels of governance, DOA. So for them to buy anything is a struggle on both sides. So if you're going to buy a new production line, then the amount of governance that goes through it on the client side before it even hits the marketplace is immense. And then when it hits the marketplace, then you've got, I'm not taking that risk, and the contractual conversations that happen there as well. So it's mega programs run by committees and committees on boards. It's you're controlling masses at each and every point. You've got to then go back to this structured way of thinking, or you go for a repeatable. What's repeatable each and every time, so that it's a workflow, and that's what you're going through. The more repeatable it is, the easier it is to.
So I want to take a quick tangent because we started talking about drilling holes and flying drones, and my brain started to kind of go that way. I'm like, okay, well, they drill a couple holes per day, but then you have a Giga project, so it's probably a lot of holes spread around lots of sites, and that goes to some sort of progress meeting. And then that progress meeting updates another progress meeting, which updates another progress meeting. And then eventually somewhere, someplace, which is how it always works, there's someone who's looking at 10 milestones and it's like, yes, my $1 trillion project is on time. Can you walk me through, how does that actually functionally work to get the data and information spooled up to be relevant enough to go up, and then kind of maybe also highlight at what levels does certain information fall away? Because I got to imagine at a certain point in time, what is actually happening in construction is irrelevant. It's more just how much money do we spend and is the project on time? So can you speak a little bit towards that? Because that one is like, I'm struggling in my brain to keep putting all the puzzle pieces together and how it just works.
Without getting into all the details, the difficulty is sort of what you said. You have a lot of open fronts where progress is occurring, right? So your initial problem is, how do I actually gather that progress in as close to real time as I can? I agree with your other statement. At the end of the day, at the top tier of project management, you want to know, am I on budget and am I on time, right? So somewhere from measuring that I actually drilled a hole here today, you have to capture that, aggregate that, and basically follow that information thread. It has to aggregate into actual activities into your schedule, which then, and that's where it has to update into your normal CPM process and demonstrate. Because we got all of these things done across all these different work fronts, we absorbed it into our schedule, and it's still showing that my completion date is here. It's still the same thing that we did on smaller jobs. It's just a lot harder because there's a lot more volume of information to capture. You're not getting any more time because whether it's a mega job or a giga job, you're still reporting weekly and monthly, right? And so this ties back to why the leveraging of technology and information systems is so crucially important, because you can't rely on quantity surveyors to walk the site and put that together and write it down and then put it into an Excel spreadsheet and then all that stuff. You have to basically do all that data aggregation far, far more efficiently to be able to get it all the way through into your master program and be able to demonstrate my critical path still shows that I'm completing on time, or I'm so many days late, or whatever, right? So it's the same thing, is just much bigger, much more complicated, and you have to do a lot more in the same amount of time than you had to do in a smaller job. So
just come back to your delivery model, though, doesn't it? So if your delivery model is to design and build, then you've got to kind of, the contractor's going to self-certify a lot of his work. You go out and check it later. If you're going for this alliance kind of view, then it's a different approach again. You're going for a fixed price, then you're going to get as many people on the contractor side as you are on the employer side, and it's a man market system. So it really goes back to, what's the right way of delivering the project or the element of the project to collect that data.
I think what you mentioned, Paul, therein is an opportunity as well. Traditionally, you're absolutely right. The contractor will do their progress update and hand it over, and then somebody from your side is now going to go and validate it from the client side or the management side. Well, there's an opportunity here for evolution where, let's say, you are utilizing a third party to do that assessment using technology, whether that's drones or whether it's other things that are sort of visually capturing progress. Those opportunities exist. And then both parties agree that whatever is calculated as progress measurement, both parties will agree upon. There's an opportunity there for significantly optimizing the old way of working things. But you see, as we talk about how everything is integrated, let's say the technology exists, you still need a corresponding change in the agreements which bind the two parties, where both parties will agree that we will now use this as the acceptable means of measurement of progress, right? So it's all of these things have to come together before you're actually going to extract value from this new, potentially new way of working.
It's scaling up as well as down. Foundations and everything else, massive quantities of work, excavation, and then you get into the nuts and bolts. So it's different kind of scaling of different metrics and making sure that you can layer them through. But, this all comes back to your planning at the first stage, and if your planning at the first stage is wrong, you're going to be constantly chasing your tail.
I think one of the key points that I'm taking away from this is actually that it's the concept of scaling. So I've learned the concept of scaling first in physics, where you have things like nuclear reactions where they scale exponentially. And then you have the concept of scaling in venture capitalism, which is how do you exponentially grow a business? And actually what I'm coming across here is this is the same kind of principles and thoughts about how to scale. And it's very, very difficult, I found, for humans to think non-linearly. But it's a skill you have to develop. It's not inherent. But this is scaling to a mega extent. So even if a venture capital startup company like mine, there's a certain level of scale, but in my mind, it is always, always, always going to be behind those of the Giga projects. Like, you're talking I need to ramp up to spending, I don't know, 100 million or 50 million, whatever, a day within this time frame. There's no venture company that's like, that is what I need to ramp to. So it's just an entirely different thought. And I'm just kind of finishing a thought on this, which is, I don't know anywhere else in the world where you have to build one of the world's largest businesses without history in the shortest amount of time. That to me is what's happening here. It's the creation of enterprise.
And if I can pick on that, I think this is where we're actually quite at an interesting point, because historically with smaller jobs, more, let's say, typical project sizes, right? There's always been this approach where we're going to pull a crack team together and that they're going to work really, really hard. And, maybe in a 3 to 4 time frame period, they're going to deliver something. The tricky thing that's happening is that because the scopes are increasing and we're getting into the mega giga space, you have to merge your crack team, project team approach towards organizational development. And I think there's a bit of a cultural divide there, because, we're just going to pull these guys together and they're going to deliver and then they're going to disband and go elsewhere, is not the same thought process for organizational development that you have for, I'm going to set up a company that's going to operate for decades and keep delivering something in this portfolio for a very long time. So you have to take from what, really effective corporations have learned over the years and embed that into the project delivery industry and actually figure out how to find that balance, because you have to effectively do both. You have to ramp up to a fully functional, proper organization, as in a corporation, but in a very short amount of time, right? But also without losing your ability to really chase a deadline, which a lot of the organizations do not, because they're cyclical, or their operations are about doing the same thing again and again and again for a long period of time. Whereas a project team, by definition, is supposed to start, peak, and then execute, and then conclude. So you're not doing the same things. So you can't lose your identity as a project team. You still have to be able to operate as a project team. But at the same time, you have to absorb a lot of the lessons that long-running organizations have learned and embed that in there so that you can actually do both things. Deliver as a project team, but be able to sustain yourself like a long-running organization. And I think that's what makes all this so interesting.
The difference there in an organization, a project, is the team that starts the project is never the team that ends the project. And you've got to get used to that. You will have a shelf life in a mega program that in an organization you won't. You might be there from the beginning to the end. You're going to retire as nose and link CEO, but if you're in a program entity, you might be very good at something and then you're 10 years out. You've got to move on to the next one. Starting up programs is probably where I am. Some people come in and it's turn the handle stuff. So there are different skills and different people needed at different stages of the life cycle as well.
I have to say, this is one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had this year, and we're in December. It's up there just because of the depth of thought. The thought is enjoyable. It's an explanation of thought. As we're approaching the end of the episode, I'm just going to bring it up slightly. Why don't we help listeners and help people try and envisage what kind of scale are we talking about here? So are there any fun statistics that you can share, like the biggest procurement you've ever seen, or the biggest spend in a single day you've ever seen, or something like that, to give people just an element of the size of what Giga projects mean?
Well, I think we forecast a peak, $1 billion SAR a day, which is what?
300 million.
Yeah, 300 million US a day spend.
300 million a day. Okay, one sec. I'm going to process that in my head, because I know that if you look at the data center spending, the big ones like Microsoft are publicly saying about 10 billion a quarter.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting. Yeah.
Help me do the maths.
A data center will do like 5 to 10 million per month.
So we were spending on Crossrail £5 million a week at the peak on one project.
But now you're talking about 300 million a day.
Yeah. And Crossrail was considered huge.
Yeah, that means just you're clearing well over $1 billion a week.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine the interest charges on it.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
So that means interest charges. We're going to finish this episode. We'll each just become the bank instead of doing all this project delivery stuff because, you know, you make the money off the free money. So there you go. Have a good night, everyone.
Well, I think I'll finish with thank you so much for the time this afternoon. I'd love to, for the listeners listening, I'd love to hear what you think and whether or not you want us to continue this level of conversation. I really, really want to continue the conversation just personally. I could, you know, I think I'm going to fly out and just pick your guys' brains for hours. I'll pay for dinner. That's the cost of this. And the other one is, I have to say that this is probably when I have a spare moment, which is very rare, I like to play factory games where I build factories. This is my crack team. This is the 4 where I'm like, we would build the greatest factory that has ever existed. So yeah,
What's,
Paul's looking
Greg,
at me.
what's that factory?
I don't play games.
What's that factory? The building, Greg. Like, what are we creating out of your mystery factory?
To be honest, these games are just building factories so that you build more factories. It's a cyclical loop. It literally is just
I like this
your brain
pyramid
working
scheme.
for the sake of your brain working. Beautiful. Well, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
And well, you're welcome back anytime. And for everyone listening or watching, please like, subscribe, recommend it to a friend. That just helps us grow and spread the message. Thank you very much.